Hi, I'm Kate Elliott, and I'm here with the January 2022 Narrative Worlds this month with Karen Lord, the fabulous Karen Lord, who's joining me from the Caribbean. So we're two tropical people happily talking to each other about how cold it is in the winter. So as always, the goal of this series is to dig into the idea of narrative worlds and the theory and practice of building them and of the writing process. And each month the guest joins me and we have a dialogue about some different subject, something that particularly interests them and that I learned from. We'll talk for about 45 minutes. Leave space for questions at the end. Please feel free to ask questions. I'll close the hour by mentioning who's going to be on deck, who's on deck for next month. And some of you will be watching this on YouTube because this will be put up on YouTube at some point in the future for anyone to watch. The question buttons at the bottom center. Our fabulous tech person, Nathan, will be keeping an eye on the chat. I won't be. And my standard disclaimer, this series is not about a goal or a lesson. It is a discussion by professionals about our experience. There's no right answer. There's no secret handshake. If you hear something useful, don't laugh. They'll realize if you hear something useful, that's fantastic. And if not, that's also fine. So I want to introduce Karen Lord, who I've known since 2011, right? Or we met person in 2011. I remember it well at World
San Diego.
San Diego, yeah. So Karen is the author of the multi-award-winning and World Fantasy Award nominated novel Redemption in Indigo, which is a fabulous book. Also, the science fiction novels, The Best of All Possible Worlds and The Galaxy Game, as well as the novel Unraveling. You've also edited New Stories, Old Worlds. Is that the correct title?
New Worlds, Old Ways. Speculative Tales of the
Old
Caribbean.
Ways. Oh, man. Okay. Anyway, yeah. Anthology of stories from the Caribbean. And multiple short stories. And in fact, you and I appear in a best of collection this year together.
We do.
We're there. And actually, I think it was that fact that we both have short fiction. Yours is a short story or a novelette?
That particular one is, it just edges over into novelette. I think it's so we both have
really
novelettes
in the Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy 2021.
And I have to say, I always forget where the cutoff point is because it does seem to vary depending on which venue or which award you're looking at. But I think it comes close to. I think it comes close to novelette, like just over the boundary.
Just over it, yeah. I mean, it's an arbitrary measure.
It's very arbitrary, yes.
Right? I mean, it feels like a novelette. It feels like whatever. But I think actually the fact that we both appeared in that may be part of what led us to think about this idea of world building at different lengths and through different perspectives, because you're going to need, you can't do this. You can't write a short story like you do a novel. You can't recreate world building in a short story the same way you would in a novel. But so we're going to get to that discussion, but I wanted to start by asking you if you have anything you want to say about what world building is to you in the context of someone who writes speculative fiction.
So this is where I completely lose everybody's faith and by describing what world building is to me, because for me it's not sitting down with notebooks and sort of timelines and breaking down character likes and dislikes and family trees and all the rest of it. I mean, that stuff is lovely, and sometimes you end up bringing that stuff in when you are wrapping things up and tidying things up. But for me, it starts with a feeling of I am living in someplace different. So when I come to fictional world, what I am bringing to it is the sensibility of a traveler.
Oh, that's so great.
Well, this is promising. I was hoping that it wasn't going to be considered something that was a little too esoteric. But yeah, I'm trying to think of it as a traveler, or I'm trying to think of it as, imagine I went into a room and there was an encyclopedia, a set of encyclopedias, and I could pick up any volume and just read an entry and find out more about this world. But I'm not going to be able to look at the full set. I'm never going to be able to go through every single detail. I also can't trust that even the people who wrote the entries were completely correct. I have to start thinking about who wrote what from what point of view. What was their agenda? What was the mythology they grew up with? What was the propaganda they grew up with? And these are all things that make the story almost like start to appear and start to gain more texture and so forth, because now you're not just talking about living in a world, you're talking about living in a complex world, you're talking about living in a world that has issues and problems and history and things that is still working out. And you are trying to figure out all of that. Now, I used to work in foreign affairs. I used to be a diplomat. And one of the things that I did the Foreign Service program at Oxford. And I was very fortunate to be in a class where everybody was mid-career diplomats from all over the world. And one of the things I found the most valuable was to just sit down and have a conversation with someone about their country. Just their point of view, their experience. And these were often things that didn't make the news. It wasn't big enough to make the news. It wasn't big enough to draw attention maybe to your part of the world, but it was something that could still be very huge in terms of how their family life developed, how they developed as an individual, how their culture evolved. And I'm just listening to all these stories, and it's just amazing. So, I listened to one friend of mine talk about his experience in he's Croatian, his experience during the war. Listen to another friend from Micronesia talking about how to sail the sort of the three-cornered sail canoes, and listening to someone from Ecuador explaining about the huge economic crash that they had and how that was so devastating to people who, as he put it, you do all the right things, you get an education and you pay your mortgage and you save for your pension or whatever, and then it just all gets wiped out. And there was just something about that when I contrasted it with the on paper stuff that I could learn about these countries, that made me realize, okay, you know what? I'm not just a traveler, because a traveler, it can be a tourist in which sense you get a superficial view of things. You've gone in there with a guidebook or with your encyclopedias, and you kind of just picked up what they want you to hear. But when you listen to the people who were there, and that's where in the story, that's where your characters are your world building, because your characters are telling their story. They're telling their story. They are enriching the world for you. They are expanding the world for you. And sometimes, and this is where I said, not everybody can do this. Sometimes the reason why I'm not writing those notebooks in advance is because the character still has to tell me about the world that they're living in.
Yep. Yeah.
And whether it's, sorry, I'm babbling, go ahead.
No, because what you said there just made something pop in my head. Sometimes I don't know something until two characters interact, because there's something going on in the back, and I have to let that, I don't know what that process is, but it's the interaction that creates the world, not a set of texts. And I am someone who has notebooks so I can remember things, right? So the name of that city or that street they walked down, so I can look at it later. But for me, that world building all happens in the interaction between people and then the people and their environment. Anyway,
exactly. No, I'm just smiling so broadly because that is what makes the act of writing so enjoyable. I always say to people that the real difference for me between somebody who enjoys fiction and starts dabbling in writing and somebody who becomes a professional is that you have to understand the way you enjoy a book as a reader and the way you enjoy it as a writer have to be, they're two different things. They kind of have to be. So it's not just a case of, when I'm reading a story as a reader, there's certain likes and dislikes I have, there's certain expectations that I have. But when I come to it as a writer, I mean, there are entire genres that I absolutely cannot stand as a reader, but I will absolutely be immersed in the craft of a particular writer, writing the story that I should hate as a reader, because I can see how they built it. So you have to enjoy the building is what I'm saying. If you're going to be a professional writer, you have to enjoy the building. You have to enjoy what the characters are telling you. And it really is a case of trusting your subconscious to do what it needs to do.
And also, I want to come back to that. You talking about how you spoke extensively with the people in your course. My sister, one of my sisters, she is the director of the International Students Union at University of Oregon, which means it's a space where international students can come in. And of course, pre-pandemic, it's different, a little different now. They have more protocols in place. But they could have meetings there. They could just go and sit they could be a place for them to just come and sit. They might have movie night. They might have whatever. They could have clubs meeting there, small. So it was to be a welcoming space for international students. And so she has work study students, all of whom are international students. And she's done a lot of work with taking her latest group of, work study students. And then they have to talk about, for example, how do you deal with conflict? How do you deal with authority lines? Because people are coming from such different spaces that the capacity for misunderstanding is strong, when in fact, people, even if everybody all wants the same things, they may approach them with such differences that her job as the director is to make sure, listen, okay, I see this is your way of dealing with it, and this is your way, and let's talk about how these can work together.
Yes.
And it's that ability to, and to me, that there's something important about your discussions with the people in the course and her discussions, which is finding out that there isn't just one single way that approach. And I do sometimes read books where I feel like it's like, this is the way it is, and here it is. And now that we know it, we don't need to, it's like, there's nothing outside.
There's no deviation from that. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a simplistic world.
It's not like that, because everything in this world is a matter of negotiation.
Yeah.
Everything is a matter of where is the middle ground. Now, I want to make it quite clear, I'm not talking about a both sides situation. I'm not talking about a there is no objective truth situation. I'm talking about sociology in the sense of how people perceive the world. I'm not talking about science in terms of how the world is. So let's make a very clear distinction on that. I think sometimes people kind of mix up the two a bit, and it gets very fuzzy, and they seem to think, oh, well, we can, everybody lives in a different world and both worlds are valid and whatever. All of our worlds, even the worlds that we hold dearly, are invalid because we never see clearly, not in this life, okay? We never see clearly, we what was it? Through a glass darkly? That's where we are right now. So there's always going to be, that's why I don't believe in perfect protagonists. There's always going to be an element of error in how you view things, in some of the decisions you make, and it's how you negotiate that, even with good intentions or with neutral approach, or sometimes people are oblivious and it causes more harm than if they're malicious. These are all things that just provide such incredible fodder for story. If you are, I would have to say, aware enough and courageous enough to let that happen in your story. And also, I once completely blew a reader's mind in a book club by saying this. I said, I was writing, I was talking about the best of possible worlds, and I said, yeah, Delarua, sometimes she really irritated me. I had her say this, and I was cringing, and they were like, you had your character say stuff that you didn't, and it wasn't even something as strong as I don't agree with what she said. I just thought she was making a fool of herself. I thought she was being embarrassing, and I was like, no, I have to put this down because she's not a shining star. She really does make mistakes, and this is a human thing. Even if you have the bestest buddy in the world, there are going to be times that they annoy the hell out of you, right? And that has to be true in your fiction as well. So yeah, the whole idea of, can you love your characters, but see them for the flawed humans that they are, and write them as such, and write them as trying to deal with an environment that is not the best, but they're maybe trying to make the best of it, or maybe they have to learn that is not the way to make it. So they have to, and these are all things that are, so world building, to get back to our topic, world building is a combination
it's all our topic, yeah.
It's a combination of the knowledge that you bring, but it's also about the perspectives that you bring, and how willing you are to be as uncertain in your fiction as you are in real life.
I'm writing that down. That's so profound. But keep going.
Okay. Like, again, sometimes I have readers say, oh, well, you didn't fully resolve this, or you didn't fully, this character still doesn't seem to know exactly what's going on here. And I'm like, yeah, that actually is life. You're not going to have every aspect wrapped up tidily. Yeah. These are things that sometimes the very fact that your character continues to live with this tension is part of the story and is part of the character's development. I'm going to use a classic example because why not? So when I was reading Lord of the Rings, and I mean, I read Lord of the Rings in between, like, late primary school to about when I was 16, and I had my own copy. And that was what my mother gave me my 16th birthday. And what always struck me the most about Lord of the Rings was that it was the first time I had read a story where the heroes won and then they came back home and then everything wasn't perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I especially got very, very involved emotionally with the fact that Frodo basically had PTSD. Yep. He kept feeling the wound, he kept feeling the whole strain and the stress of what he went through. And as I read more about the background to the story, I went and did a lot of research on the Great War and the kind of effects it had on British culture as a whole, the whole lost generation of young men who disappeared, the ones who survived, who felt that maybe why did I survive when people who were so much brighter and better than me perished. And I just like took all that and looked at the story again. I was like, wow. I've been reading so many stories because, of course, this is the point where you're transitioning from children's literature into adult literature. And I'm like, I'm reading so many stories before where they all live happily ever after. It's all resolved. It's all, it's tidied up. And this one is sticking with me. This one is more like life that I like, but I still like it. One of the things I did in the Narnia movies that I really appreciated is that in between The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and Prince Caspian, they made a strong point of reminding you that the children were basically in the middle of World War II. And they did something which was not strongly done in the books, but which as adults or as older children, you can understand. How does it feel to grow up and become not just a man or a woman, but a king or a queen, and then be reverted back to your childhood age and sent back to school, and there's a war going on in your actual country, and you're not old enough to fight. You've led battles before, you've slayed giants. I'm trying to remember what I was going to say there. You've slain giants and everything like that. You know that you have that capacity, but you've been reverted back to an age where you're not allowed to do all that. And they showed just a bit of that at the start of Prince Caspian. I was like, yeah, this is the complexity. This is what I mean when I say, when you put that in, because Lewis wasn't really interested in world building the UK for his readers, because his readers were of that time. The war was fairly in the recent past. He didn't have to explain to them all that context. But coming as modern viewers to the same story, to world build for us, and world building is part of historical fiction as well, to world build for us what it would have been like to be a child growing up in wartime. That was an essential part of the story for us to grasp as readers.
Yes, and actually that brings me to a question, which is when you're dealing with a story, when you're writing a story for a reader whose reaction you can't control, nor should we control it, right? Mm-hmm. But they're going to have a reaction that we can't anticipate. And this is a good example of a situation where what are the things, for example, with world building that you think you have to have versus what you would like to have, what the story might need, and what you might possibly need to do to make sure that there's an important aspect that the reader will somehow, to some extent, grasp what you're trying to get at. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? Because people bring these expectations, and sometimes expectations can get in the way of how they're interpreting the story that you think you put on the page.
I believe I understand your question, but believe me when I say I have no easy answer.
Can you make it easy?
My problem,
I know there's no, yeah.
My problem is twofold. Readers come in with genre expectations, which I tend to smash. And readers come in with cultural expectations,
Yes,
which tend to be different from mine. I live in an island that has under about 300,000 people. So I don't expect my readers to share the culture that I grew up in, to understand any in-jokes, to understand any kind of like mild references I might be making. So on the one hand, it makes me try to be crystal clear. And as far as I can find a neutral ground, I try to find a neutral ground. A neutral ground in the sense that you're still telling your story because, okay, Redemption and Indigo, it's based on a West African folktale. I put a lot of Caribbean influence into it. But when I was working on it, while I was at Bangor actually, I had the full manuscript and I said, this is my opportunity to give this to a range of readers that I would never have access to ordinarily. So I gave it to a Polish guy and I gave it to a German girl and I gave it to people whose their first language was not English, or they just, yes, the first language is English, but they had other kinds of expectations in English literature. And I just said, tell me what's not clear to you. Tell me what kind of made you go. And that helped a lot because I had a lot of linguistic idiosyncrasies. That I wasn't even aware of. This is a problem. You're not aware sometimes of where your idiosyncrasies are until you yourself come into conversation, discussion with someone, debate with someone. So in some respects, I really welcome when you can get an early reader and have that kind of conversation, because that feedback is what helps me to, and I want to make it clear, you're not flattening it, you're not stripping it of cultural references, you're not like, watering it down, but you're just realizing, what, I may need to put in a little extra. Nalo Hopkinson does something utterly amazing. I always use the opening paragraphs of Midnight Robber as an example in workshops. She's using pure dialect. Mind you, this is a dialect she invented. It's a combination
This is
of
the book by
existing...
Nalo Hopkinson. Did you already say that? Did I miss it?
Yes, yes, that's right. Nalo Hopkinson, Midnight Robber. So she's basically using a future version of a blended Caribbean patois. When she goes into those first few paragraphs, instead of making you feel you have to flip back to a glossary or, just like completely losing all sense of what's going on, she uses a musical sense of repetition. So she would say a word one way and then she would say it in another way, which is more the standard English. And you're like, oh, okay, so that means that. So you are learning as you go. Yeah. Beautiful. That is what I call beautiful, seamless world building. It's not a case of, I'm going to send you to the footnotes, or, well, Pratchett does footnotes, but he doesn't specifically for humor, and I appreciate that as well. They're not being sent to footnotes. You're not being, made to like go to a glossary or whatever. It's very organic. It's you, the traveler, again. You're stepping into this world, and they're teaching you how they speak gradually. And you're just picking it up, and then you get comfortable, and then you almost forget that you never knew this language to start with. Yeah. So, yeah, basically you're saying what has to be there. I would say that repeat yourself. Don't take anything for granted. If you want to sort of reinforce a point, if you want to reinforce something in how you want something to be taken or whatever, maybe you need to have a minor character come in and mirror the reaction you want to have happen. Maybe you need to have, some myth or some lore they're referencing. You can always find some way to like put an extra layer to it where you're kind of almost like drawing a line under to say, see, pay attention here, because I want you to really pay attention here. And of course, the trick is doing that without looking like you're doing that. Because
Yes,
you don't want it,
yeah.
you don't want it to be too obvious. You don't want it to be like, oh goodness, I'm like standing in front of the class pointing at this thing on the board. But you do want to do it in a way where it becomes part of the music. Like I said, Nalo's opening to her novel is musical. The rhythm and the repetition feel natural because that's just how that's how the narrator speaks. So you want to find it, you want to find a way to do it in a way that's natural. You want to find a way to do it that is not a genuine kind of, oh, I know I'm talking to a foreigner here, a stranger to my world, and I have to teach you these things.
Yeah.
Think of them not as a pupil, but as a friend. So, you're kind of like, let's go have drinks, as opposed to sit down and learn this, and somehow find some balance in there.
This is I just recently had a short story published on Tor.com called The Tinderbox, which is not so much a retelling of the Hans Christian Andersen story, The Tinderbox, which is the one about the soldier and the dogs with the big eyes and how he overthrows the king and queen, mostly just so he can get a kiss from the princess. But at the beginning, or about a third of the way into the story, he beheads a witch. And so it's like, what happened then to the witch, right? So it's a re-examining or a extension of the story. And it's about revolution. But what was interesting to me, this reminds me a little bit of that Prince Caspian, the need to put in the information, is that because it was a short story, and it was set in a kind of what I call the European 19th century milieu, right? So I thought, I don't have to put in world building. It can all be woven into how the people interact. It's a folk story thing, right? So there's, this is the witch had this plan all along, but it was going to take several generations, and she needed people to do things. Getting her head cut off was just part of the plan, And so late in the story, because it kind of culminates in what I would call the 1848, the barricades in Paris and the bloody revolution, right? Or the 1793 one, either way. So I don't really so much state that the revolutionaries win as I say, in a single sentence, something, the newly built parliamentary building, and then I go on. Yes. Well, I saw a review of the story that said, well, she talked so much about how the witch was going to overthrow the king, but then there's not a new leader. And I realized that I had taken for granted that someone would read, an American maybe, who doesn't know about what parliamentary system means, would read that and not link it. Yeah. And then in retrospect, I thought, well, should I have put one sentence in? Did it need that?
That's hard. That one is dicey, and you kind of almost have to flip a coin on that one.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, but it just reminds me of how do we world build in short stories differently than in novels?
So I have an example, and I'm going to tease you about this because you're kind of notorious for trying to write short stories and ending up kind of.
Yes, I am.
I have a short story that's out today self, and it's free. It's free for everybody to go and look. If you check out my Twitter, I've already linked to it. It's the Sunday Morning Transport, which is a Substack that issues a story a week. And this story is called Legend, and it is a little over 1,200 words.
Wow.
Yeah, I knew that would be a good tease to you. But when I was working on it, it was actually fantastic. I was working with Clarion West because we were looking at different workshop styles, different workshop techniques. So this was literally something I had written for them to allow us to test out some of the different workshop techniques. And like I said, sometimes you're oblivious to your own idiosyncrasies, your own cultural tweaks and whatever. So I wrote this thing, and I was thinking about, where I needed to make a little bit of emphasis, whatever. And then someone said something, and I was like, oh, shoot, this is so ingrained in my life that I didn't even consider that I had to make a point of it. And what the point I had to make was that it was set in a multi-ethnic country. I live in a multi-ethnic region. I didn't think I had to specify that the story was, and it was strange. So I ended up putting in one line, just one line, to make it clear that the outsider, the foreigner, who is my advisor in the story, it does not stand out because of his looks, because there are going to be other people who look like him in that country. He stands out because he almost means to stand out in the kind of way that some people do when they go somewhere different, and they maybe carry a little sense of superiority with them. So they're always doing things and saying things to always make themselves just a little bit apart from the rest of the population, even if they're, a good set of people who look just like them and dress like them or whatever. No, they gotta make sure they're not blending in. But that was something I needed to be told. I needed to be told that. And it would not have crossed my mind at all. I mean, I would have to say that I actually feel as if it's in some senses more necessary to workshop and or get feedback for short fiction when you're trying that delicate balance of packing a lot of world information into a very short space. Because you're right, they're going to be blink and you miss it sentences. They're going to be blink and you miss it, encounters. And they're also going to be bits that you completely forget to put in because you're like, oh wait, doesn't everybody have this experience? Whoops, no, they don't. So getting the feedback is where, because in a novel, you have room to stretch, you have room to repeat, you have room to bring in other examples and so on and so forth. The economy, the efficiency that's required for a short story, you really do have to make every word count. I love it though. I love it. I mean, I didn't get into this business as a short story writer, but I've just sort of fallen in love with the precision and the delicacy that you can bring to it. It's almost like you're sculpting something with a scalpel.
It's a challenge. And in fact, the Tinderbox, which I used because it was just published, I had 2 beta readers who, but I'm Danish American. I grew up with Hans Christian Andersen's stories. They're like ingrained in me. They're like in my bones. So I gave it to 2 beta readers who they maybe have seen The Little Mermaid, the Disney version, which don't get me about that ending, which is not true to the actual ending.
We can have an entirely different podcast just with that ending,
right. But so they only know like 1 or 2 of the famous ones, and then usually not through the actual story. Well, neither of them knew the Tinderbox at all, even though to me it's like this huge story in my child's brain, right? So I had to revise the story a couple times to keep it short. It's under 6,000 words. Thank you very much. But
well done.
But without retelling the original story, which would lose the point, I had to get across what had happened in it.
Yes.
So that you could see how what happened in the rest of the story reflected on it. And that was its own. And I wouldn't have known if I hadn't had those readers to point out to me that they didn't know. One of them said, I had to go read the story. I found it online. And I'm like, this is not good. Most people aren't going to want to read the story. I need to make the story stand alone so that you never have to read the original if you don't already know it. But it was and it wasn't that I thought other people knew it, but somehow the references I made to it in the writing for me were enough. Like in a different context, like when I said the parliamentary building, I thought every reader will know what that means. They'll make that connection, but every reader won't necessarily, and you can't find that out through your own perspective.
Now, if it's any consolation, more famous names than ours have made that. I can't say made that error. Let's just say that sometimes people write for a certain audience, for a certain readership, and they don't realize that they might have increased access to other readers. So there are people that they never wrote for to start with, who then start to engage with their work. And, then the issues are going to come up because you do have a reader in mind, roughly, when you come to a beta reader, when you come to a workshop, and you do tailor your story to that, even if you think you aren't. Because you're like, these are for the people who grew up in the same school system as me, I often tease Zen Sho, who I absolutely adore. I love her work and I love her as a person. And I say to her, we have the same Commonwealth experience. We have the same, colonized by the British, raised, God help us, on Enid Blyton kind of experience. it's going to make, in some ways, it makes our fiction accessible to each other in ways that you can't quite express to other people. And we would have gone the parliamentary reference straight off. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So the example I give for that is, children's books. Puck of Pook's Hill, Rewards and Fairies, written by Rudyard Kipling. So I got given those as a child, and I'm reading these books, and I'm just like, I have no idea what's going on. This is actually kind of boring. I really don't know, because I read Just So stories. Just So stories are very kind of universal and accessible and whatever. And these ones were just a slog. So I kind of put them on the bookshelf, came back to them, because I'm always rereading. I'm always rereading, and I don't have any, I'm not shy about going back and reading children's literature. I don't have any qualms about, oh, something is too young for me, whatever, come on. Yeah. And I was like, wait a minute. This is really clever. This isn't really for children, is this? And what happened, the difference between the early read and the later read is that I began to know more about British history. And basically those two books are just tons of British history. And the readership assumption is that you are a child in the British school system learning your country's history. Yeah. And not only learning your country's history, but you know the significance of certain folk myths and tales and all that sort of thing. And all of that is being brought into these stories in a way that's just very casual. But even though I was, by the time I was born, we were no longer part of the British Empire. So my school system did not privilege British history in the way it would have for my parents and grandparents. And I didn't know the background. I didn't know the context. I didn't know what the heck was going on. I didn't even know what to look for because he was being too subtle with it. Right. He was being too subtle with it. And it was only when I went back, I was like, oh, wait, that person with the arrow in the eye. Okay, right. I got who that person is now. But there was nothing there there were no footnotes there. There were no footnotes. There was nothing there to say, well, this is actually a story about, no, there was nothing like that. And I only came to the fullness of those stories and really how well written they were and how entertaining they were as a full adult when I had the history reference. So that brings me back to, I guess, my other point, which is not every story is going to be for every reader. So sometimes you got to maybe reinforce the parliamentary line. But like I said, flip a coin. Maybe you might be like, you know what?
Maybe it was fine just like it is, right? Maybe it was in the right proportions. I want to, I want to, because there was something you specifically wanted to talk about before we started. And this is the evocative versus the detail. So you said that you wanted to talk about, when do you world build through evocativeness and when by details? And I wanted you to define, and I want to give you a chance here, because we could talk about this other subject for another 5 hours. Actually, we could, especially you and me. Yes. But I wanted you to talk about, what do you mean? How are you defining those things? And what do you mean by them? And maybe with regard to short fiction and novels, or maybe just in general, however it goes.
So in some respects, even that short story that I wrote is more the evocative way. Evocative definitely works better for short fiction.
Can you define what you mean by that?
Well, I will give you a sense that you're in a different world by talking about things in a very casual way, but those things are clearly different from our world. So, somebody will make reference to a verse that everybody knows, or somebody will, point out a monument, and there's just this sense of here's a history to this place. Here are events that happened. Here are things that we take for granted. There's a government structure. These are some titles. And you don't stop and explain the titles. You don't stop and explain what the government looks like. We talk about a general, so you know that there was some kind of war going on. We talk about protests. We don't actually say who was against who. We don't even give names to the country. But the evocativeness is the emotion. So they're part of a funeral cortege. The sorrow is there. The regret is there. The reminiscing is there. Those are the point of the story. That's what I mean by evocative. That can also be a part of your world building, because you're just really meant to sit behind that character's eyes and feel what they're feeling And they're not going to tell you the details of why they're feeling sad, or the details of, when I say the details, I mean literally like, what was this person's name and what ages were we and how long this war go on. You're not going to know all that, but you're going to know that it affected them deeply. So that's what I mean by the evocative. And there's still going to be, in a novel, there's still going to be pockets of that in a novel, because as I said, you can't read the whole encyclopedia set even for a novel. But the detail is a kind of a cool thing, because so yes, I was indeed one of those really nerdy kids who completely just like fell into the appendices of the Lord of the Rings. They were like the best thing, but I was not sufficiently nerdy to appreciate the Silmarillion. I was like, nah, you could have stopped. That's good. I'm good. Because the Silmarillion, as you know, is Tolkien working on a lot of things. So some things contradict themselves, and he's absolutely comfortable with being uncertain about various things, which is cool, which is something I've said you can do. But I was not really looking for that. But the idea that you could have these different runes, these different alphabets, and these different languages, and looking at all these maps, and yes, the family trees are that. You could go away from the story and just read these things, and there's a separate entertainment to that. So there are readers who want that. There are readers who want that, and they want the kind of fantasy trilogy that's going to give them that. And that's fine. I have to admit, I don't want that so much more as an adult, because I think I've just done too much real life, like graduate study, postgrad study. And I'm like, no, I really don't want to see another appendix or footnote when I'm reading my fiction now. But before I got to that stage in my real life, I was happy to do those sort of things, because it was almost like training wheels for scholarship in some way. So
it's a bit like nonfiction, because it's presented in a similar manner.
Exactly. So so I say that to say, I've seen some people almost like, the literary genre divide. I've seen some people almost mocking that kind of approach in our genre, where it's like, oh, you've got all these tables, and you've got all these appendices, and you've got all these footnotes, and really, can't you just write a straight story? And it's like, no, that's so not the point. You can have a style of world building that does come with all the Elder Scrolls and this and that, and just like gives all this marvelous rich background, because you've got a story that is basically extending for approximately 30 generations, and you need that level of scholarship to hold that all together. So as it expands, as I would say, you kind of need to have that external structure to have something to hang it all on. I think that definitely some writers have their strengths in some areas more than others. So, if you do come across a writer who doesn't give you that, don't force them. maybe, again, I would say, maybe this is a thing they like to read, but don't like to write, because that's another thing as well. I mean, I'm as fascinated as the next person by, various, somebody said to me once, if you're going to invent magic, there always has to be a cost. It's sort of like how you cannot have a perpetual energy engine.
Right.
So magic always has to have a cost. That's how you get your stakes in there. That's how you add, character growth and tension and all the rest of it. You can't just have the free lunch magic, because it just doesn't work. So there's a part of me on almost like a psychological level that is fascinated to see how writers do all that, how they create their magic systems in a way that is very almost like law-abiding. Yes. Law-abiding in the sense of, do this, these are the consequences. It's very clear, but it's not a thing that you're going to see in my writing. I do like more fuzzy edge things. I do like things where it's not so much that if you do something, there will immediately be consequences. It's more the context in which you do it, and whether there are authorities who can make sure you get caught and pay for your wrongdoings or for stepping over your boundaries. And that's I guess that fuzziness is more like real life. So you're kind of doing different things, and most of all, I do recommend both readers and writers. If you're a reader, find the kind of story that you like, but also appreciate you got to branch out, and don't force a writer to always produce the kind of story you like. I see some writers who definitely have an arc of development in the kind of stories they produce. And some readers get kind of mad about that. They're kind of like, I used to enjoy the early stuff and now I don't get this new stuff. It's like, come on, you don't want to stuck in the same place all the time. We're growing older too. We're seeing the world differently. That's all going to come out in our stories. So so if you're a reader and you like a certain thing and you want to stick with that thing, and maybe your writer is going in different directions, just be mellow about it. But if you're a writer, again, you're going to find that challenging yourself in different ways is what helps to keep the job fresh. So maybe if you recognize that, okay, I've been leaning heavily on this very structured system in terms of this world building and whatever, I'm gonna try something in a shorter form and more evocative and see how I can manage to do that. And maybe you might fail the first few times, or when I say fail is not the right word. Maybe you may not come up to the standard that you're accustomed to, but it's all about stretching your skills in different directions. And if you don't want to do that, that's fine too. Sometimes both reading and writing is simply our happy place, our comfort zone. This is a particular groove that we like to go over and over again because it's what makes us happy, what makes us content, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So, I liked your disclaimer at the start of this of this webinar, because it is true. We're not telling you, point. If you tick these boxes, ta-da, you've got it. No, it's not like that. This is why it's called art. It's discovery. It's what comes out of you, both in terms of not only the content, but the techniques that you employ to produce that content. So experimentation is where you want to be at. As I said, trusting your subconscious, having the courage to experiment, and just having the courage to allow yourself to evolve and change, allowing your work to evolve and change. And yes, it does in fact help, because sometimes what I would do is I would say, okay, how does so-and-so do this? So remember I said to you that I get very excited at the craft of certain writers.
Yeah.
By the way, I got really mad at Kate. When I met her, she gave me Cold Magic. And I enjoyed it so much, too much, because it was like echoing a story that I wanted to write, because I was starting to write the Galaxy game. And I had Rafi at that magical school. And the first thing that you have in there is magical. I'm like, damn it, no, this is too much like what I was imagining. And I have to say that I basically stopped reading you because you were too close to what I was doing. Oh. And I was like, no, this is gonna really mess in my head. I need to get a better, like, solid identity as a writer before I can go back to her work, because this is really completely messing in my head. So right, sorry, that was a bit of a digression. But what I mean to say is that sometimes it is actually very useful to look at how people do things to guide you in how you need to do things. Now, one of the reasons why I like to look at Nalo Hopkinson's work is that her voice is nothing like mine. The themes and topics she looks at quite different from what I look at, but her techniques are brilliant, and I can still lift her techniques and apply them to what I'm doing. So it's kind of interesting. You're not looking for somebody whose work is identical to yours in terms of themes and approach and whatever. No, you're actually looking for somebody who's going to challenge you a little bit and whose brilliance you can see. And do not be surprised if the work you don't necessarily enjoy as a reader is the work that you find brilliant as a writer. I can't handle the horror genre, I'm so sorry. But Nathan Ballingrud has a short story / novelette called The Good Husband, which blew me away. And I went to teach this to a workshop, and the workshop, of course, was a range of people. So it ranged from one kind of quasi-goth girl who was like, yes, this is right up my alley, to another one who was more like me in terms of not handling horror. She was like, this was torture. Why do you have us read this? The same person who said it was torture, about 2 years later, was writing her own horror story for the Commonwealth Short Story Prize, because she couldn't get it out of her head, because she was fascinated at what he had done, because she was like, you know what? I may not have enjoyed it as a reader, but something about it is sticking with me as a writer, and I got to investigate.
Yes, I absolutely agree that one of the ways I learn the best is by reading and watching what other people are doing. And I'm not here to read stuff that's exactly like mine because I can write that. I want to
Thank
read
you.
what other people write. I want to read how other people's perspective. We're at 50 minutes and Jennifer has a question. Is it actually a bad thing to write to a very specific audience? I would say no, not at all.
Not at all. There's nothing wrong with writing to a very specific audience. And there are short stories I have that are basically written for the Caribbean market. There's short stories I have where there was one in particular called A New Panama. And somebody wanted a reprint. And this was, a publisher based in the US. And I was like, are you sure? Because I'm not going back to rewrite that. And the context is something that the Caribbean people understand. I'm not sure I can translate now for the US reader. They were like, no, it's fine. Up to now, I have never seen a review from a US perspective of it. So I don't know how people, but even the title references one of our well-known authors, George Lamming, one of his best-known stories, best-known novels, In the Castle of My Skin. And then the whole context becomes clear in the sense of why I call it A New Panama. I can't even begin to explain all that. so
and not in a short story, yeah.
And not in a short story. Yeah. So it's a very specific audience, but it gives me joy. It gives me joy. And sorry. And this thing I did only once. So I have this friend in Spain. And this does not usually happen to me, but basically she wrote a review of Best of All Possible Worlds, I think it was. And sometimes people write a review and it's like, oh, this is a positive review, or this is a nice review. And then there's like a reviewer looking at it like, oh, wait a minute, this person really got it, So yeah. I try not to engage because I do have some fairly good boundaries in terms of, let's not engage with people. And to tell the truth, I want to, if you review my stuff well, I want to keep the distance so you can keep reviewing my stuff. I think it's bad to have your friends review your stuff. So I want that distance, professional distance maintained. But a friend of hers wanted me to send some books to her, some autographed books from Barbados to Spain. And I was like, this is going to be a problem because I didn't have copies of all the books. I would have had to order them into Barbados, sign them, mail them off to Spain. And, she was willing to cover all the costs. And I'm like, you know what? You have no idea. Shipping from Barbados to Barbados, this is a real issue. Why don't I just write her a short story for you instead? And I was like, the moment it came out of my mouth, I was like, Karen, what the hell? But then I was like, no, I actually like this idea. So I sat down with this friend of hers and I said, okay, tell me more about your friendship. Tell me more about some of your in-jokes and I'll weave them in. So that to me is example of the narrowest audience I have ever written for. I wrote basically a custom-made fanfic of Cygnus Beta with these two friends' references to their friendship woven in. And it was great fun. But I'm not going to do it in a hurry. We have one more question, but I just say to that the only issue there is someone who just have your expectations right. Some people, there are people who do quite well writing to or doing art for a specific niche, right? Other people may do as you did, maybe an occasional thing because it gives them joy. But if you run up against your own expectations with like, I'm going to write for this very specific niche and I want to expect to be on the bestseller list, maybe that's not going to go, right? No, but if you're doing it but there's plenty of reasons to do that. And theoretically, I hope for most of us, all of us really is what I hope it for, is that we can do multiple different works, right? Okay, so Nathan has a question. I love this. Do you start writing with the intent of throwing out most of the first words and ideas just to discover where the story is leading to? Yes. No.
Oh, good. All right. Tell me more. Mine is yes, kind of, but I want to hear about no.
A lot of good stuff goes on in my head before I actually go to the keyboard. And so when people are like, oh, you got to sit down and write 500 words a day, I'm like, but I think about the story every day. So sometimes what is happening is that by the time I've come to start writing, I've already like put together some things very solidly in my head. So writing is not how I discover what's in my head. What's in my head is there, and ruminating and expanding and doing all sorts of lovely things. And then when it gets to a point where it's too much for me to hold because I'm going to start forgetting stuff, that's when I go to write.
So I think actually it sounds to me like our process is similar, but I have to do a lot of that. I'm very physical. So I have to do a lot of that through the physical action of writing. So I'll type some stuff out and then I'll come back and I'll have like 5 drafts of a story, a novel that might not be written for 4 or 5 years, but I'll have 5 drafts of 5 different versions of the first 1,000 words, and plus 2 other attempts at that opening, and where you can see how it's shifting underneath me. That is, some people can do that all in their head. I have to move.
It has to
come through.
I understand.
Yeah, but it sounds like you're bringing in and discarding, and there's a churning going on, right? And that churn is the art, I think, where the creation is.
It's something that I can't even define. Hang on. This is probably related. So I outlines. Thank you. I was exactly what I was going to say. Outlines. So what happens to me with outlines is that I don't play well with outlines, but I recognize the importance of them. So what I tend to do is that stuff goes on in my head, but I have a rough outline, and then I will write like a third. And while I'm writing that third, I am pausing like every week. I pause to reassess what I've written, because I've always deviated from the outline. But I've always deviated from the outline in ways that are important because my subconscious is trying to make it better. And then I tweak the outline and keep going. And then by the time I get to that third, I'm tweaking the overall structure of the whole book. And then I go into the next third, which is again stopping periodically to revise and look at where I go off piste and how it works into making it a better story. And then, again, stop at the next 2/3. And then by the time I get to the end, I'm revamping the whole thing. I'm like, okay, where's the strength of the story? Where's the core of the story?
Yeah.
How do I? And then you pop back in and do your foreshadowing and dress up a whole bit, so what have you. So
I think if I do season 3 next, which would start in the fall this year and go into the next year of Narrative World, I might do one not so much on world building, but on process. Because yeah, I know it's we all have so many different processes. And we are about out of time.
Yes.
Does anyone
I knew it
have
was going to happen like this.
I know. And I'm this has been fantastic.
It has. It's always great talking to you.
Yes, always. We'll do it again soon.
Yes.
Soon. We'll do it again. Okay. So I want to thank everyone who's here for the live recording. I want to thank everyone who may be watching this in the future, in some unknowable future, on YouTube. There will be for those here, some people will be moving on to the writing the writing date with the flight crew next month on a date I can't remember. Hold on. February 21st. I have Michelle Segarra West. She said, and her choice was, why do we need to world build, even if we don't want to? So it'll be fun.
I'm gonna have to pop in and witness that one.
It'll be, yeah. I said, Michelle, say whatever you want. I want to thank Nathan for being the tech guy. I want to thank Karen again profusely for coming on with me. I want to thank SFWA for providing this platform, because it was just too big an obstacle for me to figure out anything myself. And all of you who are listening, and I hope to see you again next month. Did I leave anything out, Karen? I
think you've covered it pretty well. The main thing was to make sure that you talked about who was coming on next.
Okay, thank you. And we're done. So thank you.